I was sitting on a white plastic chair, less than 6 feet from the bathroom door, while all the guests laughed and made toasts in the main ballroom. I could smell the disinfectant mixed with the expensive perfume of the flowers that I myself had helped pay for. My son Michael was at the head table, looking flawless in his suit, wearing that perfect smile I had known since he was a child. Tiffany, his new wife, shone in a dress that cost more than I earned in 6 months working at the laundromat. No one turned to look at me. No one except the waitress who passed by twice, asking if I needed anything, with that look of pity that hurts more than any insult. It had been barely 20 minutes since Tiffany approached me with that fake smile practiced by women who have never had to fight for anything. She took my arm delicately, as if I were made of glass, and whispered in my ear with a voice that was soft but firm. She said there had been a last-minute change in the seating chart. She explained that her mother, Catherine, needed to be at the table of honor because there were important guests from her family who required special attention. She said I would understand, being a woman of the world. She added that, besides, sitting near the restroom would be more comfortable for me in case I needed to get up during the reception. And then came the sentence that seared itself into my brain like a hot iron. Mom, it's really better if you stay around here. That way you won't accidentally appear in the background of all the photos. You know how wedding photographers are. They capture everything. I didn't answer. I just nodded while I felt something inside me shatter in silence, like glass falling onto a thick carpet. She walked away, giggling softly, and I watched her return to the head table where Catherine was already occupying my seat, the place that should have been mine as the mother of the groom. I watched them hug. I watched them toast with French champagne. I watched them pose for photographs with those huge smiles you only see in magazines. Michael didn't even turn to look for me. Not once. His mother, the woman who gave birth to him, who raised him alone after his father died when he was just 7 years old, didn't even deserve a glance to confirm that everything was okay. I sat there for another 15 minutes, watching them serve the first course at the VIP tables, while I hadn't even been given silverware. I observed every detail, the way Tiffany touched Michael's arm, the way Catherine greeted the guests as if she were the mother of the groom, the camera flashes illuminating their happy faces while I remained in the shadows, next to a door that opened every 5 minutes, letting out the sound of a flushing toilet. I thought about the $20,000 I had saved over 3 years. Every bill represented overtime hours at the laundromat, double shifts on weekends, skipped meals, and medications I didn't buy for myself, because that money was for him. It was for his happiness, for this day that was supposed to be the most important of his life. Then, I stood up. Not abruptly, not with rage. I stood up slowly, like someone getting up at the end of a movie where they already know the ending. I walked among the empty tables toward the area where they had placed the gifts. That long table covered in white cloth and decorated with twinkle lights. There were large boxes, gold envelopes, packages wrapped in shiny paper, and there, almost hidden among the rest, was my ivory-colored envelope with Michael's name written in my shaky handwriting. I recognized it immediately because I had attached a small silver ribbon to the corner, a detail I thought he would notice, something to let him know which one was mine among all the others. I took it calmly. I felt the weight of the bills inside, that weight I had struggled so hard to gather. I opened the envelope and counted mentally. 200 $100 bills, intact, clean. They represented everything I had been capable of doing for him, even when he no longer saw me, even when he had stopped calling me Mom and started introducing me as Margaret in front of his friends. I put it in my purse, that old faux leather bag I had cleaned 3 times so it would look presentable tonight. No one saw me, or perhaps they did see me and didn't care. I was invisible anyway. I walked toward the main exit of the ballroom. My shoes made a soft sound against the marble floor. I could hear the music, the laughter, the sound of glasses clinking in endless toasts. Just before crossing the threshold, I stopped. I turned back one last time. Michael was standing, a glass in his hand, saying something that made everyone laugh. Tiffany was by his side, her possessive hand on his shoulder. Catherine watched them with pride, as if he were her son, her achievement, her victory, and I stood there, in my simple gray dress that I had bought on sale, with my purse full of money that they would never know I recovered, with my heart broken but my dignity intact. I didn't say anything. I didn't make a scene. I just left. I walked out that door knowing I would never walk back through it. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in hours, I could breathe fully. I hailed a cab from the corner. The driver asked me if I had been at a party, and I replied yes, that I had been at a funeral. He didn't understand, but he didn't ask any more questions. The whole way home, I held my purse tight against my chest, feeling the bulge of the bills, feeling how that money was becoming mine, again only mine. I arrived at my small apartment, that place Michael stopped visiting 2 years ago because he said he was ashamed for his friends to know his mother lived in an old walk-up downtown. I locked the door, placed the purse on the kitchen table, took off the shoes that had been hurting my feet all night, and sat on the worn-out sofa where I had spent so many nights alone. I didn't cry, not yet. I just sat there, in silence, thinking about everything that had happened, about everything that was to come. They didn't know it yet, but that night I hadn't just recovered my money. I had recovered something much more valuable. I had recovered my capacity to say enough. I had recovered the certainty that I was no longer going to be invisible, that I was no longer going to accept the crumbs of affection they threw at me when it was convenient for them. I stood up, walked to my bedroom, opened the drawer of my nightstand, and took out a folder I had kept there for weeks. Inside were papers, phone numbers, addresses, names. It was a plan. One that had been brewing since long before this night, since the moment I started to realize that to my son, I was no longer a person. I was just a resource used when needed and forgotten when necessary. I sat on the bed, with the folder open on my lap. My hands were no longer trembling. My breathing was calm. For the first time in years, I felt completely lucid, completely present, completely aware of what I had to do. They thought I was an old woman, tired, without options, without a voice, without power. They were wrong. I was a woman who had survived the death of her husband at 32, who had raised a son alone, working jobs that destroyed her back and hands, who had learned to live with little and to value every penny as if it were gold. And now I was going to teach them what it means to underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I opened my phone. I had 3 text messages from unknown numbers, surely guests asking if I was okay, if something had happened to me. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I searched for the contact I had saved 2 weeks ago under the name James Sterling, my lawyer, a serious, professional man who had listened to me intently when I went to his office and told him everything. He had told me that I had more options than I believed, that the law protected mothers even when their children did not. I wrote him a simple text message. It happened. Tomorrow at 10 in your office. Let's proceed with everything. The reply came in less than a minute. Understood, Margaret. Rest easy. We start tomorrow. I put the phone aside and lay back on the bed without changing my clothes. I stared at the white ceiling full of cracks that I knew by heart. I thought about Michael when he was little, when he would hug me before sleep and tell me I was the best mom in the world. I thought about the exact moment he stopped saying it, when he started to be ashamed of me, when he started treating me as if I were a mistake that needed to be hidden. And I thought about Tiffany, about her cruel laugh, about the way she had pushed me aside as if I were trash. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow, everything would begin. But that night, in my bed, in my home, with my $20,000 back in my purse and my dignity finally recovered, I slept better than I had slept in years, because I knew something they didn't know yet. I knew that the silence of a wounded woman isn't weakness, it's strategy. And I had just declared a war that they didn't even know had started. I woke up at 6 in the morning without needing an alarm. My body was used to getting up early after so many years working at the laundromat where shifts started before dawn. I stayed in bed a few minutes longer, watching the sunlight begin to filter through the thin curtains of my bedroom. I was still wearing the gray dress from the wedding. I hadn't changed. I hadn't taken off the makeup that a kind neighbor had helped me apply. I got up slowly, feeling the weight of the years in my knees, and walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I barely recognized. She was 66 years old, but that night seemed to have aged her 10 more. Dark circles were deeply marked under my eyes. Smudged mascara formed dark lines on my cheeks. I took off the dress carefully and hung it on the closet door. It still smelled of the cheap perfume I had worn, mixed with the scent of humiliation. I stepped into the shower and let the hot water fall over my aching back. I closed my eyes, and then the memories came, the ones I had been holding back all night, the ones I needed to face if I wanted to go through with my plan. Michael was born on March 23rd, in a public hospital where the nurses were harsh but efficient. His father, my husband Robert, was so excited that he cried when he held him for the first time. We were young, poor, but full of hope. Robert worked in construction, and I cleaned houses. We lived in an apartment smaller than this one, with a single bedroom and a kitchen where barely one person fit. But we were happy. Michael was our miracle, our project, the reason it was worth getting up every morning before the sun. Robert died when Michael was 7. An accident at the site, a beam that fell at the wrong moment, a body that stopped breathing before reaching the hospital. I remember the call. I remember the foreman's stuttering words on the other end of the line. I remember how my legs stopped holding me up. Michael was at school. I had to go pick him up. I had to tell him that Dad wouldn't be coming home. I saw something in his eyes go out that day. He was just a child, but he understood perfectly what the word forever meant. The first few years were brutal. The workers' compensation they gave us for Robert's death barely covered the funeral and 2 months of rent. I had to get 3 jobs. I cleaned houses in the mornings, worked at the laundromat in the afternoons, and 2 nights a week I ironed clothes for a dry cleaning business. Michael spent his afternoons with Mrs. Higgins from the building, an older woman who fed him and helped him with homework in exchange for almost nothing. I would get home past 10 at night, hands cracked from cleaning chemicals, back destroyed, but always with a smile for him. I promised him he would go to college, that he would have everything I didn't have, that he would never lack for anything. And I kept that promise, even when it meant I ate once a day so he could eat 3 times. Even when I had to wear torn shoes for 2 years because his school uniform was more important. Even when I got sick and didn't go to the doctor because that money was for his books. Michael was a good student. He got good grades. He was responsible, obedient. He would hug me when I got home from work and tell me that when he grew up, he would buy me a huge house where I wouldn't have to work ever again. But something changed when he entered college. I managed to get him into a private university with a partial scholarship. I paid the rest by working double shifts, selling things, borrowing when necessary. Michael started making new friends, friends with money, with cars, with families who summered at the beach. He started to feel shame. I noticed it in small things at first. He stopped asking me to pick him up at the university. He stopped inviting me to school events. When his friends asked about his family, he said his father had died and changed the subject quickly, as if I didn't exist. One day he came home and asked me to please never come looking for him at the university again. He said his friends had seen my laundromat uniform and asked him if I was the cleaning lady. He said he was embarrassed to explain, that it was easier if I simply didn't appear. I felt as if a knife had been driven into my chest, but I smiled and told him it was okay, that I understood. That night I cried silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't hear me. It was the first time I thought that perhaps I was raising a stranger. Years passed, and the distance grew. Michael graduated with honors. I was at the ceremony, sitting all the way in the back, wearing a borrowed dress. He didn't introduce me to any of his professors. He got a job at a marketing firm, started earning good money, moved to an apartment in an elegant part of the city. He visited me less and less. Our conversations became superficial, rushed. I always asked how he was. He always answered fine and changed the subject. He stopped telling me his problems, his dreams, his fears. I became an obligation he fulfilled once a month with a 10-minute call. He met Tiffany 2 years ago at a work conference. He talked to me about her on the phone, excited for the first time in a long while. He said she was beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. That phrase hurt me. From a good family, as if ours wasn't. As if the fact that I scrubbed toilets to feed him was something to be ashamed of. I told him I was happy for him, that I hoped to meet her soon. It took him 6 months to introduce us. The day I met her, Tiffany arrived in an expensive dress and designer shoes. She looked me up and down with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She talked a lot about her family, her trips, her job in public relations. Michael looked at her captivated, as if she were a trophy he had won. During the meal, Tiffany made several comments about how small my apartment was, how old the building was, how it was brave of me to live in this part of town. Michael said nothing. He didn't defend me. He just nodded and changed the subject. From that day on, I knew Tiffany saw me as a problem that needed to be solved. I confirmed it when I started noticing how she manipulated situations, so Michael saw me less and less. She organized plans on Sundays, which was the only day he used to visit me. She invented family emergencies when I suggested we get together. Once, I overheard part of a phone conversation where she was telling someone she hoped her future husband understood that boundaries had to be set with in-laws, especially if they came from different backgrounds. The water in the shower started to get cold. I got out, dried off, and put on comfortable clothes. It was 7:30 in the morning. My appointment with James was at 10. I made coffee in the small pot I had bought on sale 5 years ago. I sat at the kitchen table with the folder I had taken out the night before. Inside were documents I had been collecting for months, copies of bank transfers I had made to Michael over the years, receipts for payments I made in his name when he was in college, text messages where he asked to borrow money he never paid back, a detailed list of everything I had spent on him since Robert died. There were other things, too. Screenshots of conversations I found by accident 3 months ago. Michael had left his laptop open at my house during one of his short visits. I went to close it and saw that his Facebook Messenger was open. I didn't want to read it. I really didn't want to. But something stopped me. I saw my name in one of the conversations. It was a group chat with Tiffany and some friends of theirs. They were talking about the wedding, about the guest list. And then I saw Tiffany's message. It read verbatim. "We have to think about where to seat your mom at the wedding. She can't be at the head table because my mom has to be there, and it would be weird to have 2 mothers-in-law. Plus, you know how your mom dresses. She doesn't match the aesthetic we want for the photos." Michael replied with a laughing emoji and wrote, "You're right. Let's put her at some table in the back. She hardly knows anyone anyway. I don't think she'll mind." Another friend commented something about it being sad but understandable. Tiffany replied, "It's about levels. You can't mix everyone. My mom paid for 70% of this wedding. She deserves to be in the place of honor." I read that and felt the world stop. My son, the boy I gave birth to, raised alone, pulled forward with my own destroyed hands, agreed to hide me at his own wedding as if I were an embarrassment. I took screenshots of everything. I saved the images on a USB drive. I closed the laptop and went to my room to cry for hours. When Michael came to pick up his computer, I acted as if nothing had happened. I smiled at him, kissed him on the cheek, wished him a good day. He didn't even notice anything was different. That was the night I searched the internet for lawyers specializing in family law. That was the night I decided I was no longer going to be the silent victim of my own story. After reading those messages, I couldn't sleep for 3 days. I would wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, remembering every word, every laughing emoji, every derogatory comment. But what hurt me most weren't Tiffany's words. She was a stranger, someone who had entered our lives recently. What destroyed me was Michael's silence, his complicity, his laughter. The fact that my own son agreed to treat me like something that needed to be hidden. I continued my routine as if nothing had happened. I went to work, returned home, ate alone in front of the TV. Michael called me twice that week to ask if I could lend him $2,000 because they had to pay the deposit for the wedding venue and were short on cash. I said yes, as always. I went to the bank, withdrew the money from my savings, and transferred it to him. He thanked me with a short text message. "Thanks, Ma. I'll pay you back next month." I knew he wouldn't. He never did. But that didn't matter anymore. I was piecing together a puzzle they didn't even know existed. A week after the laptop incident, Michael came to visit me on a Sunday afternoon. He arrived alone, without Tiffany. He looked tired. He told me he needed to talk to me about something important. We sat in the living room, and he began to explain that the wedding was going to be bigger than they had initially planned. That Tiffany's family was large, and they had many important friends. That's why they had decided to make some adjustments to the guest seating. He told me, without looking me in the eye, that I would probably be at a table with some of Tiffany's distant relatives, older people who didn't know many people, so I wouldn't feel lonely. I listened to him in silence. I said nothing. I just nodded while he kept talking, justifying himself, making excuses that sounded hollow even to him. When he finished, He asked if I was okay with that. I told him yes, of course, that the only thing that mattered to me was his happiness. He sighed in relief, gave me a quick hug, and left. I watched him leave through the window, get into his new car that I had helped pay for when he said he needed it for work, and drive away without looking back. That night I opened my old computer and searched for more information. I checked his Facebook, his Instagram, all the social networks where he thought I didn't know how to enter because I was an old woman who didn't understand technology. I found more conversations. In one of them, Tiffany posted a photo of the wedding dress on her Instagram story with the caption, "When your mother-in-law wants to have an opinion on your dress, but you and your mom already decided everything." There were several comments from her friends, laughing, saying things like, "That's the way, and you have to set boundaries from the start." I discovered they had opened a joint bank account for the wedding. Michael had asked me for money several times, saying it was for ceremony expenses, but he never included me in any decisions. He never asked me what I thought of the hall, the flowers, the menu, nothing. I was just an ATM to be visited when needed and ignored the rest of the time. I did mental calculations of everything I had given him in the last 2 years. Between loans he never paid back, payments I made for him, and cash gifts, the sum exceeded $35,000. $35,000 that I had earned cleaning bathrooms, washing other people's clothes, ironing shirts until my hands bled. Money I had saved by skipping meals, wearing old clothes, denying myself any luxury. And all for what? To be treated like a nuisance, to be hidden in my own family, to be the private joke in conversations I wasn't supposed to read. It was then that I made the decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to make a dramatic scene where I cried and scolded him for his ingratitude. That would serve no purpose. Michael had already made his decision. He had chosen Tiffany. He had chosen a life where I didn't fit, where I was a problem to be solved. Crying wouldn't change that. Screaming wouldn't change that. But there was something I could change. I could change my role in this story. I could stop being the victim. I Googled lawyers specializing in family matters. I read reviews, compared prices, made discreet calls. I found James Sterling, a lawyer in his 50s with a good reputation and reasonable fees. I requested an appointment. He received me in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. He was a serious man, with proper manners, who listened without interrupting while I told him the whole story. I showed him the documents, the screenshots, the receipts of bank transfers. James reviewed everything carefully. When he finished, he took off his glasses and looked me straight in the eye. He told me that legally I couldn't force Michael to return the money because most of it had been gifts or loans without a contract. But he told me something more important. He told me that I had control over my own assets, over my future decisions, over whom I included or didn't include in my will. He explained that many mothers in my situation kept giving and giving, hoping love would return, but that almost never worked. He asked me what I really wanted. I told him the truth. I wanted to reclaim my dignity. I wanted Michael to understand that I wasn't an infinite resource he could dispose of without consequences. I wanted him to feel, even for a moment, what it feels like when you are treated as if you don't matter. James nodded. He told me we could work together to protect my assets, to ensure my future decisions reflected my true worth. I signed a contract with him that same day. Over the next few weeks, I continued to act normally. Michael called. I answered. He asked for money. I gave it to him. He told me about wedding plans. I listened. But inside, something had changed. I was no longer the same woman. Every time I transferred money to him, I kept the receipt. Every time he asked me for something, I wrote it down. I was building a case, but not a legal case. I was building the case for my own liberation. 2 weeks before the wedding, Tiffany called me directly for the first time. She told me in a sweet voice that they needed last-minute help with some unforeseen expenses. She asked if I could contribute $5,000 for flowers and decor. I told her, of course, it was the least I could do for my son's happiness. She thanked me effusively and told me I was a wonderful mother-in-law. I hung up the phone and laughed alone in my empty kitchen. Wonderful. What an interesting word for someone they planned to sit next to the bathroom. I took the $5,000 out of my savings account. I put them in an envelope. But this time I did something different. Before sealing it, I took a photo of the money, noted the date, wrote in my personal notebook the purpose of the loan. James had taught me to document everything. He had told me that maybe I would never use that information, but it was important to have it. That power wasn't in shouting, but in knowing exactly what cards you held in your hand. I took the envelope to Michael at his apartment. Tiffany was there, radiant, showing me photos on her phone of how the hall would be decorated. She showed me where the head table would be. I saw clearly that there was space for many people. I asked innocently where I would be seated. Tiffany and Michael exchanged a quick glance. He cleared his throat and said they were still defining the final details. She smiled and changed the subject. That night, back in my house, I took out the envelope with the $20,000 I had been saving to give them as a wedding gift. I counted it completely. 200 $100 bills. I arranged them perfectly inside the ivory envelope. I tied a silver ribbon to the corner. I put it in my purse. And I waited. The days leading up to the wedding were strange. I continued with my routine, waking up early, going to work, returning home at dusk. But there was something different about me that even my co-workers at the laundromat noticed. One of them, Brenda, asked if I was sick because I looked more serious than usual. I told her I was just tired from my son's wedding preparations. She patted me on the back and told me to enjoy the moment, that children only get married once. I laughed inside. If she only knew. James and I met 3 more times before the date. At each meeting, I arrived with more documents, more proof, more information. He organized them methodically into labeled folders. He explained, step by step, what we were going to do after the wedding. He spoke to me of wills, of bank accounts, of beneficiaries. He told me I had more power than I believed, that I just had to learn to use it. He taught me that strategic silence was more effective than 1,000 words spoken at the wrong time. One afternoon, he asked me if I was sure I wanted to go ahead with the plan. He told me that once I crossed that line, there would be no turning back, that Michael would probably never forgive me, that maybe I would lose my son forever. I looked him in the eye and told him something I didn't know I thought until I said it aloud. I lost my son a long time ago. What I am recovering now is myself. James nodded, and we continued working. I did other things that no one knew about. I went to the bank and closed all the additional credit cards I had taken out in Michael's name when he was in college. They were cards I paid for, but that he used freely. I canceled the automatic deposit I made every month to his account to help him with expenses. I spoke to my boss at the laundromat and asked him to please not give information about me to anyone who called asking. I changed the passwords to my bank accounts. I updated my will with James, removing Michael as the sole beneficiary and leaving everything to a foundation for single mothers. I also did something that cost me a lot emotionally. I went to the cemetery where Robert was buried. I hadn't gone for months because work consumed all my time. I cleaned his headstone, put fresh flowers on it, sat on the damp grass next to his grave, and spoke to him as if he were alive. I told him everything. I told him I had failed, that I hadn't known how to raise our son, that Michael had turned into someone neither of us would recognize. I cried there, alone, without anyone seeing me. Afterward, I dried my tears and made a promise to Robert. I wasn't going to continue sacrificing myself for someone who didn't value that sacrifice. Michael called me 4 days before the wedding. He sounded stressed. He told me Tiffany was very nervous with the final details, that everything had to be perfect. He asked if I could help them with something else. I asked him what he needed. There was an uncomfortable silence. Then he asked if I could lend them $3,000 more because the photographer had increased his rate and they didn't have liquidity at that moment. He told me they would pay me back after the honeymoon, that he had just received a bonus at work that hadn't been deposited yet. I said yes. I went to the bank, took out the $3,000, transferred it to him. I saved the receipt. James had told me to continue acting normally until the wedding day, not to change my behavior, not to raise suspicions. So that's what I did. I remained the helpful mother, the one who always said yes, the one who never complained. But every action I took now had a different purpose. I no longer did it because I expected love in return. I did it because I was building a dossier of evidence showing exactly who I had been and who he had been. 2 days before the wedding, Tiffany invited me for coffee. It was strange because we had never gone out alone. She picked me up in her imported car and took me to an elegant coffee shop in the most expensive mall in the city. She ordered a latte with almond milk, and I ordered a simple black coffee because it was the cheapest thing on the menu. She started talking about how excited she was, about how she had dreamed of this day since she was a girl, about how her mom had been incredible helping her with everything. Then, with that same fake smile I knew so well, she told me she wanted to talk to me about expectations after the wedding. She explained that she and Michael were going to start their life together and that it was important to set healthy boundaries with extended family. She told me their therapist had recommended creating space for their marriage, especially in the first few years. That's why they had decided family visits would be once a month, scheduled in advance, preferably at a neutral restaurant where everyone could enjoy themselves without anyone feeling invaded. I listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, she took a sip of her latte and asked if that seemed okay to me. I said, of course, that I understood perfectly the importance of a young couple having their space, that I would never want to be an intrusive mother-in-law. She smiled, relieved, and told me she was glad we were so compatible, that she had heard horror stories about problematic mothers-in-law and was happy I wasn't like that. She paid for the coffees with a gold credit card and took me back home. That night, alone in my apartment, I prepared a simple dinner, white rice with a fried egg, the same thing I had eaten thousands of times when money didn't stretch for more. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, thinking about everything that was to come. I opened my closet and took out the gray dress I had bought for the wedding. It was simple, discreet, exactly the kind of dress a woman like me was supposed to wear, so as not to attract attention. I tried it on one last time in front of the mirror. It fit well. It wasn't elegant, but it was dignified. I prepared my purse for the next day. I put in the envelope with the $20,000. I put in my ID, a handkerchief, my fully charged cell phone. I also put in a printed copy of all the documents James and I had prepared. I wasn't going to need them at the wedding, but I wanted to have it close. I wanted to feel its weight. I wanted to remind myself that I had control of what came next. I sat on the sofa with a cup of hot tea. I turned on the TV, but paid no attention to what was on the screen. I thought about my life. 66 years, 34 of them dedicated completely to Michael. More than half my existence invested in a project that had failed not because I didn't try hard enough, but because he had decided I wasn't enough. I thought about all the times I went without eating so he could eat, all the nights I didn't sleep because I was working or worrying about him, all the dreams I abandoned because my dreams mattered less than his. And then I thought about tomorrow, about the moment they would seat me next to the bathroom, about the humiliation Tiffany had carefully planned, about Michael's complicity, and instead of feeling sadness, I felt something different. I felt power because I knew something they didn't know. I knew that humiliation was going to be the catalyst for my freedom, that every laugh, every derogatory comment, every gesture of contempt was only going to confirm that I was making the right decision. I called James. I told him I was ready. He reminded me of the plan. After the wedding, I was to block Michael's number temporarily. Don't answer calls. Let the desperation grow. Meanwhile, he would take care of formally notifying the changes to my will and my accounts. He would send me all the necessary documentation. He told me to be strong, to remember why I was doing this. I thanked him and hung up. That night I slept deeply. I dreamed of Robert. In the dream, he hugged me and told me he was proud of me. He told me it was time for me to live for myself. I woke up with the sunrise feeling strangely calm. It was my son's wedding day, and it was also the first day of the rest of my life. I woke up at 6 in the morning on the wedding day. Outside it was still dark. I lay in bed a few minutes, looking at the ceiling, breathing deep, mentally preparing myself for what was coming. I didn't feel nervous, nor did I feel afraid. There was only a strange calm, like a soldier must feel before going into battle when he already knows there is no turning back. I got up, showered with hot water, dressed in comfortable clothes. There were still hours before the ceremony, but there were things I needed to do. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my personal notebook, the one where I had been noting everything for months. I reviewed every page, the dates of the bank transfers, the text messages where Michael asked me for money, The excuses he gave me, the promises of repayment he never kept, the screenshots of the conversations where they laughed at me. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer of my nightstand, along with all the other documents. I didn't need them today. Today, I only needed my dignity and the envelope with the $20,000. I prepared a light breakfast, toast with butter and a glass of orange juice. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, aware that this was probably the last quiet meal I would have for several days. At 9 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Michael. He asked me if I was ready, if I needed someone to pick me up. I told him I would take a cab, not to worry. He insisted his best man could pick me up. I told him no, that I preferred to get there on my own, so I wouldn't delay them. He accepted without much resistance. He told me the ceremony started at 3 in the afternoon, to arrive a little earlier for family photos. Family photos. The irony made me smile. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long while. I thought about all the calls we had had over the years, the times he called me from college just to hear my voice when he was scared or sad, the times he woke me up at midnight because he had a nightmare and needed me to tell him everything would be okay, the times he called me excited to tell me some small achievement, when I had stopped being the person he called only when he needed something other than money. At 11, I started getting ready. I did my own makeup in front of the bathroom mirror with the cheap cosmetics I had bought at the pharmacy. I wasn't good with makeup, but I did the best I could. A little foundation to cover age spots, mascara on my lashes, a pale pink lipstick. I combed my graying hair back into a simple bun. I put on pearl earrings that Robert had given me for our 10th anniversary. I put on the gray dress. I slipped on the black low-heeled shoes I had polished the night before. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a 66-year-old woman who had worked her body to destruction. A woman with deep wrinkles around her eyes and mouth. A woman with rough hands and a back stooped from years of scrubbing other people's floors. A woman invisible to the world. But she was also a woman who had decided to stop being invisible to herself. I took my purse, verified the envelope with the money was inside, verified my phone was fully charged, verified I had enough cash for the taxi there and back. I left my apartment and locked the door. I went down the stairs slowly because my knees weren't the same as before. On the street, I hailed a taxi and gave him the address of the event hall. The ride took 40 minutes. I rode in silence, watching the streets, the buildings, the people pass by the window. The driver tried to make conversation, asking where I was going so dressed up. I told him to a wedding. He asked if I was family of the bride or groom. I told him I was the groom's mother. He congratulated me and told me I must be very proud. I didn't answer anything. I just kept looking out the window. We arrived at the hall at 2 in the afternoon. It was a huge, luxurious place with perfectly manicured gardens and water fountains, the kind of place that cost a fortune to rent. I paid the taxi and stood at the entrance for a few seconds. I breathed deep. This was real. It was happening. I went in. Inside there was movement everywhere. Hall staff running from one side to the other, florists arranging centerpieces, the DJ testing the sound. And in the middle of all that chaos, I saw Tiffany. She was radiant in her white dress that cost more than $8,000. That dress I had helped pay for with the $5,000 they asked me for flowers. She was surrounded by her bridesmaids, all professionally made up, all in identical lavender dresses. Tiffany saw me and walked toward me with a huge smile. She hugged me carefully so as not to wrinkle her dress. She told me I looked beautiful, although her eyes swept me up and down with an expression that clearly said the opposite. She asked me if I had brought the gift. I told her yes, that I would leave it on the table with the others. She nodded, and then, lowering her voice as if entrusting me with an important secret, told me she needed to talk to me about my place in the hall. She took me aside, away from the noise. She explained with that same sweet and condescending voice that there had been a last-minute change, that her mom had to be at the head table because there were VIP guests from her family who needed special attention, that they had thought a lot about where to place me so I would be comfortable, and that they had decided to put me at a table near the restrooms. That way I could get up when I needed to without bothering anyone. Then came the sentence. She said it with a soft giggle, almost as if it were a joke between friends. "Mom, it's really better if you stay around here. That way you won't accidentally appear in the background of all the photos. You know how wedding photographers are. They capture everything." And she laughed. She laughed as if she had just said something witty. I said nothing. I just nodded. She seemed relieved there was no drama. She patted my arm and told me the ceremony would start soon, to get comfortable wherever I wanted for now. She walked away quickly, her bridesmaids giggling and whispering as they walked together toward another area of the hall. I stayed alone in that elegant hallway with its decorated walls and dim lights. I felt something break inside me, but it wasn't sadness. It was the last piece of doubt that still remained. Now there was none. This was real. This was happening. My own son was allowing me to be humiliated on his wedding day. I walked to the gift table. There were dozens of envelopes and boxes wrapped in shiny paper. I took my ivory envelope out of the purse, the one with the silver ribbon on the corner, the one containing $20,000 I had saved over 3 years. I put it carefully among the others. I knew exactly where it was. I knew in a few hours I would come back for it. The ceremony began at 3 o'clock sharp. I was sitting all the way in the back, on a white plastic chair next to the bathroom door, just as Tiffany had planned. I watched everything from a distance. Michael entering in his perfect suit, Tiffany walking toward the altar on her father's arm, the vows, the rings, the kiss, the applause, and during all that, I remained invisible, exactly where they wanted me to be. When the ceremony ended, everyone moved to the reception hall. I followed them in silence. I found my table. It was small, near the bathroom as promised, far from everything. There were 3 other people sitting there, elderly people I didn't know and who didn't seem to know each other either. No one spoke. We looked at each other uncomfortably, and then each focused on their own plate. From my place, I could see the head table. There was Michael, radiant. There was Tiffany, perfect. And there was Catherine, Tiffany's mother, occupying my place, smiling as if that were her natural right. Waiters served French champagne. Guests toasted. The photographer took hundreds of photos. And I sat there, invisible, forgotten, exactly as they had planned. I looked at my watch. It was 5:30 in the afternoon. It was almost time. I got up from my chair slowly, without making noise. No one noticed. I walked toward the gift table with a firm step. I looked for my envelope. There it was, with its silver ribbon shining under the lights. I took it and put it in my purse. No one saw me. Or if anyone saw me, they didn't care enough to say anything. I walked toward the hall exit. My shoes sounded soft against the marble floor. The music was still playing. Laughter still filled the air. And I kept walking, one step after another, toward the door, toward the outside, toward my freedom. I crossed the door of the hall, and the cool night air hit my face like a slap. I kept walking through the illuminated garden, passing the fountains, until I reached the street. My legs were trembling, but not from fear. It was pure adrenaline. I had just done something I had planned for months, but until that moment it hadn't been completely real. Now it was. There was no turning back. I hailed a taxi from the corner. The same driver who had brought me happened to be passing through the area and stopped when he recognized me. He asked if the party was over so soon. I told him for me, yes. He didn't ask any more questions. The whole way back home I held my purse tight against my chest, feeling the weight of the $20,000, feeling how every mile taking me away from the hall was a mile closer to my new life. I got to my apartment past 6 in the evening. I climbed the stairs slowly, went in, locked the door and put on the safety chain. I left the purse on the kitchen table, took off the shoes that had hurt my feet, took off the gray dress and hung it in the closet. I put on comfortable clothes, old cotton pants, and a worn t-shirt. I sat on the sofa, and for the first time all day, I let the tears come. Not tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. I wept for 10 minutes. Then I dried my face, went to the kitchen, made hot tea and sat down again. I took out my phone. I had 3 messages from numbers I didn't know, probably wedding guests asking if I was okay. I didn't answer. I opened my banking app and verified that all automatic transfers to Michael were canceled. They were. I verified that the additional cards were blocked. They were. Everything was in order. I called James. It was almost 7 at night, but he answered on the second ring. I told him with a calm voice that it was done. that I had left the wedding, that I had the money with me. He congratulated me with that professional yet warm tone he used when he wanted his clients to know he was on their side. He reminded me of the next step of the plan. Starting tomorrow, I was to ignore all of Michael's calls. I was to block his number temporarily. I was to let the desperation do its work. He told me he would take care of the rest, that tomorrow he would send the formal notifications. I spent the rest of the night in silence. I ate something light. I watched TV without paying attention. I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. I lay awake watching the ceiling, thinking about what would be happening in the hall at that moment. Surely they had served dinner. Surely Michael and Tiffany would be opening the gifts, counting the money, planning how to spend it on their honeymoon. Surely at some point they would look for my envelope with the silver ribbon, and they wouldn't find it. I wondered how long it would take them to realize. I wondered if Michael would look for me among the guests. I wondered if anyone would tell them they saw me leave early. I wondered how Tiffany would react when she discovered that the $20,000 she had probably already counted in her mind would never reach her hands. But above all, I wondered if Michael would feel even a second of genuine concern for me, or just annoyance at the inconvenience. I slept a few hours that night. I woke up several times startled, heart racing. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wedding scene. The plastic chair next to the bathroom. The head table where I should have been. Tiffany's smile when she told me I would be left out of the photos. Michael's eyes never searching for me. Every image confirmed I had done the right thing. Dawn broke. It was Sunday, the day after the wedding. Michael and Tiffany planned to leave for their honeymoon on Monday morning. A 2-week trip to Europe that cost more than $15,000, and that I knew they had financed partly with credit cards, hoping to pay them off with wedding gift money. My money. The money they would no longer have. I got up, showered, ate breakfast calmly. At 9 in the morning my phone rang. It was Michael. I didn't answer. He called again 5 minutes later. I didn't answer. Then a text came. "Mom, where are you? I didn't see you at the party yesterday. Call me." I didn't reply. I turned off notifications from his number, but I didn't block it yet. I wanted to see how many times he would try to contact me. I wanted to document his desperation. 2 hours passed. My phone kept ringing intermittently. Michael, Tiffany. Unknown numbers that were probably them calling from other phones. I let all calls go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages. I wasn't interested in what they had to say yet. It was too soon. They needed to feel the uncertainty a little longer. They needed to understand that I wasn't available for their convenience. At noon, James called. He told me he had sent the formal notifications that morning by certified mail. Michael would receive in the coming days a letter from a law firm informing him about the changes in my will. Informing him that he was no longer my sole beneficiary. Informing him that I had donated the majority of my estate to a charitable foundation. Informing him that any remaining property would be sold, and the money distributed according to my new instructions. The letter also included an attachment with all the bank transfers I had made to him in the last 5 years. A documented total of more than $42,000 that he never paid back. James asked me how I felt. I told him the truth. I felt strangely calm. I felt as if I had been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. He told me it was normal, that many of his female clients in similar situations described the same feeling. He reminded me the next few days would be difficult. That Michael would probably be furious when he understood what had happened, that he would try to manipulate me emotionally, that he would say hurtful things. He asked me to stand firm, to remember why I was doing this. We hung up, and I continued with my day as normally as possible. I did laundry, cleaned my apartment, meal prepped for the week. I did everything I would have done on any normal Sunday, except this wasn't a normal Sunday. This was the Sunday my son was discovering his mother was no longer the submissive woman he could use and discard at his convenience. In the afternoon, I received a voicemail from Tiffany. Her voice sounded tense, controlled, but I could detect the anger beneath the fake politeness. She said they were worried because I had disappeared from the wedding without warning, that several guests had asked about me, that they hoped I was okay, that please call them soon because they needed to talk about something important. I deleted the message without finishing listening to it. That night I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea. It was a cool, quiet night. I could hear the city noise in the distance. I thought about all the nights I had sat there alone, waiting for a call from Michael that never came, waiting for a visit he always canceled at the last minute, waiting for crumbs of affection from someone who clearly had decided I didn't matter anymore. I thought about Robert, about how we would have handled this situation together if he were alive. He probably would have confronted Michael long ago. Robert was direct, honest, incapable of tolerating disrespect. I had been too soft, too understanding, too willing to justify Michael's behavior with excuses about how hard it had been for him growing up without a father. But the truth was that many children grew up without a father and didn't treat their mothers like trash because of it. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Michael. This one was different. More urgent. It said they needed to talk immediately about the wedding money because he had noticed an important envelope was missing. My envelope. The one with the silver ribbon. He asked if I had taken it by mistake. If I could return it soon, because they needed it to pay for urgent honeymoon things. I read it 3 times. Every word confirmed what I already knew. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a source of money. And when that source dried up, suddenly contacting me became urgent. I didn't answer. Instead, I blocked his number. I blocked Tiffany's number. I blocked all the numbers they had been calling me from. Complete silence. Now the real wait began. The wait for them to understand that there were consequences. That a woman's silence wasn't weakness, but power. That I had stopped being available for their convenience. I went to sleep that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. A deep peace, coming from knowing that finally I was taking control of my own life. Monday dawned sunny. I woke up early as always, and the first thing I did was check my phone. I had 17 missed calls from blocked numbers and several text messages I couldn't read because they came from contacts I had blocked. I could imagine the content. The desperation growing, confusion turning into panic, panic turning into rage. I ate breakfast calmly, toast with jam and black coffee. Then I got dressed and went out to walk in the park near my building. For years I hadn't given myself the luxury of walking aimlessly, without hurry, just for the pleasure of being outside. I had always been running from one job to another, from one responsibility to another. But today was different. Today I walked slowly, feeling the sun on my face, listening to the birds, observing the families playing on the grass. I returned home at noon. In my mailbox was a letter. It was from James. A copy of the notification he had sent to Michael. I opened it and read it fully, even though I already knew the content. Seeing everything written on official paper, with legal letterhead, with signatures and seals, made it real in a different way. This wasn't just a plan in my head anymore. It was a legal document that would change everything. My phone rang. Private number. I didn't answer. It rang again. Private number again. I didn't answer either. This went on all afternoon, calls every 15 or 20 minutes, all from numbers showing no ID. I knew it was Michael trying to reach me by any means possible. I let him call. Let him feel the frustration of not being able to control me. Let him learn that I was no longer there to be ordered around. At night I received an email. It was from Tiffany, from her personal account. The subject line said, "Urgent. Family matter." I opened it. It was a long message, written with that passive-aggressive tone she handled so well. It started by saying they were very worried about me, that they didn't understand why I had disappeared from the wedding without saying goodbye, that several guests had asked them if I was okay, that they had to invent excuses saying I probably felt sick and had preferred to go rest. Then the tone changed. It said they had noticed my gift was missing from the table, that they understood there might have been a confusion, that if I had taken the envelope for some reason, they needed me to return it soon because they had made financial commitments based on that money, that their honeymoon was scheduled to leave tomorrow morning, and they needed to have everything resolved before then. That please reply urgently. I closed the email without replying. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the sofa. I could imagine the scene in Michael's apartment right now. The two of them surrounded by opened gifts, doing the math, realizing the numbers didn't add up, realizing exactly $20,000 were missing, realizing those $20,000 were mine, and slowly understanding that I had taken them back. That night, I almost didn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from anticipation. I knew tomorrow everything would explode. Michael would receive James's letter. He would read about the changes in my will. He would see the detailed list of all the money I had given him. He would understand that this wasn't a temporary tantrum, but a permanent decision. And then the real confrontation would come. Tuesday dawned cloudy. I got up at 6. I got ready like any other day. At 9 in the morning, the doorbell of my apartment rang. Insistent, aggressive. I knew who it was before looking through the peephole. Michael. He was alone. His face looked distorted, furious. He rang the doorbell over and over without stopping. I didn't open. I stayed on the other side of the door listening. I heard him yell my name, heard him pounding the door with his fist, heard him say he knew I was inside, to open immediately, that they needed to talk. His voice sounded different. It wasn't the polite tone he usually used with me. It was raw rage. He screamed, how dare I steal his money? That those $20,000 were his wedding gift, that he and Tiffany needed that money urgently, that they had booked services they couldn't cancel, that they had to leave for the airport in a few hours, to open the damn door and return his money immediately. His money. As if I hadn't been the one who earned it, as if I hadn't been the one who saved it, as if that money had ever been his. I stood silent on this side of the door. I didn't even move so he wouldn't hear my footsteps. I let him scream. Let him pound, let him wear himself out. After 10 minutes, his voice changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something worse. It was pure contempt. He yelled that I was a bitter old woman, that I had always been a burden to him, that he had been ashamed of me his whole life, that the only reason he put up with me was because he thought at least he might inherit something when I died. He said he had received a ridiculous letter from a lawyer talking about changes to my will, that it had to be a joke, that I had no right to donate his inheritance to strangers, that that money was his by right, that he had had to put up with me for years and deserved compensation for that. Every word was a knife, but it was also a confirmation that I had seen the truth, confirmation that my son really saw me that way. The neighbor from the next apartment opened her door to see what was happening. I heard her ask Michael if everything was okay. He yelled at her rudely to mind her own business. She threatened to call the police if he didn't calm down. That seemed to stop him. I heard his footsteps moving away down the hall, heard him stomping down the stairs, heard the building gate slam shut. I stood trembling behind the door, not from fear, from rage, from pain, from liberation, because now there was no doubt. Now I had heard with my own ears what Michael really thought of me. I could no longer deceive myself that deep down he loved me. I couldn't justify him anymore. I couldn't continue being the selfless mother who forgave everything. I walked to my bedroom with my legs still shaky. I sat on the bed and took out my phone. I called James. I told him what had just happened. He told me it was important to document everything, that if Michael appeared again, call the police immediately. Do not open the door under any circumstances, that this would probably get worse before it got better. He asked if I was okay, if I needed anything. I told him I was okay, and it was true. That afternoon I received another email from Tiffany. This one was different. There was no more fake politeness. It was direct and cruel. It said I had ruined their honeymoon, that because of me they had to cancel or modify plans, that I was a selfish and manipulative person, that I used money as a way to control Michael, that she had always known I was trouble, but Michael had convinced her to give me a chance, that clearly it had been a mistake. It said Michael was devastated, that he couldn't believe his own mother was capable of something like that I had chosen money over my relationship with my son, that they were going to move on with their life without me, that they didn't need me, that Michael now had a real family who appreciated him, obviously referring to her and her mother, Catherine. It ended by saying not to try to contact them, that they had blocked my number, that from now on, I was dead to them. I read the whole email without feeling anything. Well, not exactly nothing. I felt relief, because now the masks had fallen completely. Now they had shown who they really were, and now I could move on without guilt, without doubts, without that constant aching question of whether I had done enough, loved enough, given enough. I made dinner. Simple vegetable soup. I sat at my small kitchen table and ate slowly. Outside, it had started to rain. I could hear the sound of drops against the window. A comforting sound. Cleansing, washing, renewing. That's how I felt. As if the storm were washing away years of pain, years of humiliation, years of being invisible. That night I went to bed early. Before turning off the light, I looked at Robert's photo on my nightstand. I spoke to him silently. I told him I had tried, that I had given everything for our son, but now I had to let go. I had to live for myself, for whatever life I had left. I asked him to understand me. And somehow, looking at that old and worn photo, I felt he did understand, that he would be proud of me for finally setting boundaries, for finally saying enough. I turned off the light and closed my eyes. Tomorrow would be another day, a day closer to my new life, a life where I mattered, where my dignity mattered, where I no longer had to beg for love from someone incapable of giving it. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of absolute silence. Michael and Tiffany had gone on their honeymoon, despite everything, probably using credit cards and adjusting plans. I continued with my life as normally as possible, working at the laundromat, coming home, cooking for myself, watching TV, but something had changed deeply. I didn't feel empty anymore. I didn't feel invisible anymore. For the first time in decades, I felt whole. James called me every 3 days to check on me. He told me the certified letter had been received and signed for, that everything was proceeding according to plan, that my new testamentary provisions were legally registered, that my estate, although modest, was protected and would go to the foundation for single mothers just as I had requested. He told me I had done the right thing, to stand firm. One Thursday afternoon, while folding clean clothes in my living room, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole cautiously. It was Catherine, Tiffany's mother. She was alone. She was wearing expensive clothes as always, with that air of superiority she never hid. I hesitated to open, but something in me wanted to hear what she had to say. I opened the door, but left the safety chain on. Catherine looked at me with that fake smile I knew so well. She told me we needed to talk, woman to woman, that this whole misunderstanding had gotten out of hand, that young people were impulsive, but we, as older and sensible women, could fix things. I asked her what exactly she wanted to fix. Her smile trembled a little. She told me Michael and Tiffany were back from their honeymoon, that things hadn't gone as expected, that they had financial problems during the trip, that they had argued a lot due to stress, that Tiffany was very angry with Michael because he hadn't been able to provide what he promised, that all this was my fault for taking away the money that rightfully belonged to them, that as a grandmother I had responsibilities. I interrupted her. I told her I wasn't anyone's grandmother yet, that I had no responsibility toward a couple of adults who had publicly humiliated me at their wedding, that the money I recovered was mine, saved from my labor, and I had every right to do with it whatever I pleased. Catherine pursed her lips tight. The mask of friendliness began to fall. She told me I was being childish, that mothers didn't condition their love with money, that I was destroying the relationship with my only son over a tantrum. I replied that mothers also didn't deserve to be seated next to bathrooms at their sons' weddings. That love didn't mean accepting humiliation, that I had been a mother for 34 years and now it was time to be Margaret, a woman with self-respect. Her face hardened. She stopped pretending. She told me Tiffany came from a prestigious family, with connections, that I was just an uneducated washerwoman who should be grateful they accepted Michael despite his humble background, that my behavior was embarrassing her daughter, that if I had any decency, I would return the money and apologize, that otherwise she would ensure I never met my future grandchildren. I felt something ignite inside me, something that had been dormant for too long. I looked her straight in the eye and told her she could keep her prestigious family and her connections, that I preferred to live alone with dignity than surrounded by people who despised me, that my future grandchildren, if they ever existed, would grow up learning that humiliating the elderly was acceptable, and I didn't want to be part of that, to get away from my door and not come back. Catherine was speechless for a moment. Then she let out a dry laugh and told me I would regret it, that people like me always ended up alone and bitter, that when I was old and sick, I would realize the mistake I had made. I told her I was already old, that my health wasn't perfect, and I still preferred this to continuing to be their doormat. I slammed the door in her face. My hands were shaking when I engaged the lock. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I had done something I had never done in my life. I had defended my dignity without apologizing. I had set a firm boundary without feeling guilty. I had said no without giving explanations. And it felt powerful. That night I called James and told him what happened. He recommended I document the visit, write down everything Catherine had said, especially the threats about the grandchildren. He told me to file that document with the others, that people like her tended to escalate situations, and it was important to have a record of everything. I followed his advice. The next day, I received a text message from an unknown number. It was Michael. He had borrowed a phone to contact me. The message was long and loaded with emotional manipulation. It said he was my son, my only family. How could I do this? That his dad would be disappointed in me. That I had always promised to support him. That he didn't recognize the woman I had become. It said Tiffany was considering leaving him because of my fault. That his marriage was in crisis because I had ruined their financial plans. That they had to borrow money from her family and now he looked like a failure. That all this was my responsibility. That if I really loved him, I would return the money and fix this mess I had caused. I read the whole message, then I deleted it. I didn't reply. I blocked the number. I had heard enough. I had seen enough. Michael wasn't worried about our relationship. He was worried about the money. He was worried about his image in front of Tiffany and her family. He was worried about everything except me. A week later, James called me with news. Michael had tried to contest the changes in my will. He had hired a cheap lawyer claiming I wasn't in my right mind when I made those decisions, that I was possibly being manipulated by my own lawyer. The judge had rejected the petition immediately after reviewing the documentation. I had signed everything with full mental capacity. There were medical evaluations confirming it, and I had absolute right over my assets. James told me this was good. It meant Michael had exhausted his legal options. Now he would have to accept reality or keep wearing himself out in useless attempts. He asked if I wanted him to send a cease and desist letter so Michael would stop harassing me. I told him yes. I wanted it legally clear that I did not wish for contact with him unless it was a genuine emergency. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea. I watched the city lights. I thought about the whole journey since that wedding night. I thought about the woman I had been, always asking permission to exist, always apologizing for taking up space. And I thought about the woman I was being now. A woman who had learned that self-love wasn't selfishness, that boundaries weren't cruelty, that saying no was a right, not a privilege. I breathed deep the cool night air. There was still one thing left to do, one last thing to close this chapter completely. It had been a month since the wedding, a month since I recovered my money and my dignity, a month since I stopped being the invisible mother who existed only to serve. During that time I had cried, I had doubted. I had moments of weakness where I almost picked up the phone to call Michael, but I always stopped. I always remembered the chair by the bathroom. I always remembered his screams at my door. I always remembered that love doesn't hurt like that. One Saturday morning, I made a decision. I called James and told him I wanted to do one last thing before closing this chapter completely. I wanted to write a letter to Michael, not necessarily to send it, but to put into words everything I had never dared to say. James told me it was an excellent idea, that many people found healing in writing, even if they never sent the letter. I sat at my kitchen table with paper and pen. I started writing. The words came out with difficulty at first, then flowed like a river that had been dammed too long. I wrote about the day he was born, about how Robert and I received him with so much love. I wrote about the years after his father's death, about the sacrifices, about the sleepless nights working so he would have what he needed. I wrote about the exact moment I started noticing his shame of me, about how every rejection had been like a silent stab. I wrote about the wedding, about that plastic chair, about the calculated humiliation. I wrote about his complicity, about his silence, about his laughter with Tiffany while they planned to hide me. And I wrote about my decision, about how taking back that money hadn't been revenge, but survival, about how blocking his number hadn't been cruelty, but self-protection, about how changing my will hadn't been punishment, but justice. I ended the letter with these words, Michael, I gave you life, and then I gave you my whole life. But it turns out, I also deserve to live. I deserve dignity. I deserve respect. I deserve love that doesn't come conditioned on my utility. Today, I choose to live for myself the years I have left. Today, I choose to be Margaret, not just your mother. And if one day you decide you want to know that woman, the complete person I am, beyond what I can give you, my door will be open. But I am no longer going to beg for your affection. I am no longer going to apologize for existing. I am no longer going to be invisible, with love but also with boundaries. Mom. I read the full letter 3 times. I cried. Then I folded it carefully. I put it in an envelope and wrote his address. I left it on the table unsealed. I still didn't know if I would send it, but having written it was enough for now. The following days, I started making changes in my life. Small ones at first. I cut my hair. A modern style that made me look different. Younger. I bought new clothes, not secondhand or on sale, but clothes I really liked. I used part of the $20,000 I had recovered to fix things in my apartment that I had been postponing for years. I painted the walls a light color that made the space feel larger. I bought plants for the balcony. I also started reconnecting with people I had neglected. Brenda from the laundromat invited me for coffee one Sunday, and I accepted. We talked for hours about our lives, our children, our disappointments. I discovered I wasn't alone in my experience. Many women my age had lived through similar situations. Many had given everything for children who then forgot them. But also, many had found a way to rebuild themselves. One day, 2 months after the wedding, I received an unexpected email. It was from Michael. The subject said simply, "Sorry." I opened it with my heart racing. It was short. It said he had been thinking a lot, that he had realized things, that his marriage to Tiffany wasn't going well, and that had made him reflect on his priorities. That he wanted to talk to me if I was willing, that he understood if I wasn't. I closed the email without replying immediately. I called James. I read him the message. He asked me what I felt. I told him the truth. I felt hope, but also caution. I wanted to believe Michael had changed, but I also knew people don't change overnight. James advised that if I decided to reply, I should set clear boundaries from the start, that I shouldn't allow him to manipulate me with guilt, to remember everything that had happened. I thought for 3 days before replying. Finally, I wrote a short message. I told him I was willing to talk, but I needed him to understand some things first, that our relationship couldn't go back to how it was before because before it wasn't healthy, that I had changed and needed him to respect that if he wanted to know me now, he had to be willing to know Margaret, not just Mom, the provider. His reply came the next day. He said he understood, that he wanted to try. We agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop the following week. When the day came, I dressed in my new clothes, styled my hair with my modern cut, and went with my head held high. Michael arrived on time. He looked different, thinner, more tired, less arrogant. We sat facing each other, and there was an uncomfortable silence at first. Then he spoke. He asked for my forgiveness, not with excuses or justifications, just a direct apology for having treated me the way he did, for having been ashamed of me, for having used me, for having allowed Tiffany to humiliate me. I told him I appreciated his apology, but words weren't enough, that I needed to see real changes, that I needed time to rebuild trust, that I wasn't going to go back to being the emotional and financial ATM I had been. He nodded, said he understood, said he wanted to try to have a real relationship, not based on what I could give him, but on who we were as people. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if Michael has really changed or if this is temporary because his life is difficult right now. But I know I have changed. I know I'm no longer going to sacrifice my dignity for crumbs of affection. I know I deserve respect and won't settle for less. That night, back in my renovated apartment, I took out the letter I had written weeks ago. I read it one last time and then tore it into small pieces. I didn't need it anymore. I had said everything I needed to say, not on paper but in my life, in my actions, in my decisions. I made myself tea and sat on my balcony with the new plants swaying in the breeze. I looked at the city lights and thought about all the ground covered. 66 years of life, 34 dedicated completely to being a mother. And now, finally, I was learning to be myself. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe Michael and I can build something new. Maybe not. But I'm no longer afraid of being alone because I've discovered that the worst loneliness isn't physical, but being surrounded by people who make you feel invisible. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. The fresh air filled my lungs. And in that moment, sitting on my small balcony, in my modest apartment but now truly mine, I felt richer than ever. Because finally I had something money can't buy. I had my dignity back. I had my voice. I had my life. And I whispered to the wind the words that had been waiting for me for decades. My name is Margaret. I am not just someone's mother. I am a complete woman, and my story is just beginning.